Good morning, everybody. How's it going? So we're here with another faction guide. From this point on, I'll be doing the rest myself. Scheduling with various experts just getting difficult as we get to some of the more niche factions, and comments are showing that not everybody, but a lot of people are just preferring when I do them because they're a little more concise. So I suppose we'll just wrap these up. Vampire counts. Cool. If you haven't seen this series, this is how to build a multiplayer competitive build. We'll be going through each unit in the roster and seeing where they are best used, not trying to stay to just this patch right now, are they strong, but more of what is this unit supposed to do. And then at the end, we'll come up with a couple theoretical builds for a couple matchups that should help you more on this patch. Right. So let's get into it. Lords, there is a crap ton of them. So I can't just boot them all up. Let's just start one at a time. Master Necromancer is your cheapest Lord option. You don't see a ton of them because vampire counts are carried heavily by their very strong Lords, so cheaping out on your Lord feels a little weird, but you can go very, very cheap with this guy. I think his base cost is 350. Yes, you could put him on an Unholy Lodestone Corpse Card for some healing, Invocation Hackney's Raise Dead, and then a lesser Raise Dead summon, and I guess Master of the Dead, and he could be 1,000 gold. So you could go crazy cheap with this guy, but he's just an undead caster. Good support Lord, I guess, nice and cheap. He's not going to win you any fights dueling. He doesn't do any crazy special abilities. He's just cheap and chipper. Next up is Helman Gorst, the better option in almost every situation than the Necromancer, because he can also still be very cheap, but he has a bound Mortis engine effect. The multiplayer community uses Mortis Engine just because the Mortis Engine was the first one. Everybody knows what you're talking about, but a slow AoE drain effect. He can bring it on your Lords. You don't have to have a Mortis Engine and a Lord. You can have just one and then go wider with your army. He has a self-damaging Liber Noctis. It can be okay, but you need to be a little careful because you know he's going to heal cap himself over the course of the game, but lowering that heal cap for your enemy can be a little dangerous because if you lose your Lord as the vampires, you're usually just going to lose. But he is also a basic undead caster, but he loses his zombie summon to get a Graveguard summon, which actually in most states of meta is worse. You would not want a Graveguard summon. You want those cheap zombie summons. Zombie summons are amazing. Incredible mass, very high HP, extremely low wins magic cost. So having a limit to Graveguard summon instead of zombies is actually a big nerf to Helman Gorst. But you usually pair him with a cheap and chipper Necromancer, Unholy Lodestone. We'll get to the heroes in a second, but just if you're using Helman Gorst, you'll usually have a second Necromancer, and then with the Necromancer, you can just grab Raise Dead, and you'll be fine, right? But yeah, usually you don't actually want his Graveguard summon. Heinrich Kemmler is probably the most unique Vampire Counts Lord, in a weird way. He just plays entirely different than all their other Lords. He isn't quite a support Lord. He is a bit of a combat Lord because a lot of his stuff only triggers when he's in melee. Chaos Tombblade is the biggest one where it's like +5 melee attack and healing and stuff, but he has to be in melee for it. So you want him in combat, but you don't want him dueling. So he just needs to find... He needs to be where the action is, but you also need to keep him safe. Now to do that, he has the Cloak of Mists and Shadows, which is an amazing tanky item. He has a lot of healing for himself. He has a Krell summon, and Krell is very good against slow-moving targets. Either other foot heroes or Lords, or like a giant. Krell is slow, but he packs such a huge punch that if you know your opponent's not going to be moving very fast, Krell is amazing. His horse mount is pretty cheap, and once again, once you cut down his spells to what you actually want, maybe zombies and Raise Dead, maybe Gaze and Nagash, something like that. I honestly would cut Master of the Dead because Chaos Tombblade exists. So he doesn't really need 2 auras, but you can keep it if you want to. It's fine. But anyway, once you parse him down to what you probably actually want, he's like 1,700 gold, which is pretty cheap for a super tanky caster Lord. But no flying mount, so he can be a little less versatile than other options. We're going to skip the Vampire Lord column because it's huge. We'll just get back to it in a second. There's a Strigoi Ghoul King. There's a Strigoi Vampire Lord who's a little more elite, but the Strigoi Ghoul King is your first real hybrid Lord. He's a solid duelist combatant, and he has a hybrid mixed Lore of Magic with Spirit Leech and Gaze of Nagash, good for double sniping, which is very powerful. But again, he loses the zombie summon, so he might need a Necromancer friend if you're going to get a lot out of him. His items aren't very good right now. Opal Amulet and Potion of Strength. Opal Amulet's okay, Potion of Strength, one-time use, 50% damage is not very good. So his Bloodlust is just terrible. 25% armor piercing damage increase. It's It's not worth 100 gold. But he can be okay as a self-healing lord. He is a little spensy, and the Terrorgeist mount has worse breath attacks than dragons. So, you know, be careful. But he's a fast duelist. Red Duke is unfortunately currently outpaced by the Blood Dragon Vampire Lord in every way, but what he is supposed to be is an expensive duelist lord. Elsif is a really good debuff ability, minus physical resistance, melee defenses, makes him actually pretty good against demons specifically, which is odd because he has nothing to do with fighting demons in the lore, but I mean, it is what it is. So Elsif is a good debuff. Other than that, he has all the basic necromancy vampire spells, which is fine. They're strong spells to have and stuff, but he's just supposed to be a duelist lord. He's pretty expensive, but he'll try and pay for himself if he's ever good. Manfred is currently dominating the meta. He is unique in that he has 2 full lores of magic, death and vampires. If you use him and you're confused where your death spells are, you do have to tab at the bottom right. There will be 2 arrows. You have to arrow between what spell lores you're talking about. But with Gaze of Nagash and Spirit Leech and Fate of Buna, he has unparalleled sniping, and the Sword of Unholy Power gives him probably the best Winds of Magic regen for the entire Vampire Counts roster, just guaranteed reserves per second without damaging yourself. Looking at you, Gorst. So that's pretty crazy. A lot of Vampire Counts players right now take him on a dragon for the breath attacks, then take a bunch of spells and the Sword of Unholy Power, and they land him on his dragon in any cheap chaff, or they'll chase off something with Manfred and just keep charging at the Sword of Unholy Power. Really draw out the game with a ton of spell uses, but he is the ultimate caster for the Vampire Counts. Not nearly as good of a duelist as some of the other options, though. So remember that before you just chuck him into a bad fight. Isabella von Karstein currently has really weird anti-synergy with her roster. She has the Blood Chalice of Bathorai, which looks incredible, and it kind of is at first glance. But the problem is you can only use it on a lord or a hero. And on this roster, all your lords and heroes are going to heal cap anyway. So having a designated 200 gold super heal for something that's going to heal cap regardless of whether she exists or not is kind of pointless. So she suffers from that. She's not a particularly good duelist. She is meant to be more of a support caster lord, but then she has some dueling abilities, kind of. I don't know. Isabella's just confused. She's a confused character that doesn't really do anything well. Kind of like Khalida. You know, Khalida on the Tomb Kings, where some people try and defend her and they're like, no, she's a pretty solid duelist. It's like, but then what's all that ranged buffing stuff? And they're like, no, she's pretty good at range buffing. I'm like, then what's with all the duelist stats? Isabella's the same. Is she objectively terrible? No, but until she figures out what she's trying to do, she's not going to be great either. Vlad, her husband, is the exact opposite. He knows exactly what he's doing. He has no mount options. He is purely a foot lord. He is tankier than anything in this entire game with his Von Karstein ring plus the Blood Drinker. He can have the Hunger too, but I don't think you need both. So he has 2 different regenerations. One is all the time, and one is when he's only in melee combat. So you might as well just take the one that goes all the time. Mass Beguilement debuffs an enemy nearby, so pretty good at dueling. He's a basic undead caster, which is usually quite good, though one problem with him is his foot status makes Gaze of Nagash hard to get good hits on. Gaze of Nagash is better at a high angle, so whatever. But still a zombie summon, still has invocation hack, crazy tanky, and he can get kind of cheap for a Vampire Lord. Probably want like that, so then 2,200, but he'll do all right. He'll do all right. Back to the big category. We have the Vampire Lords. There's a whole list of them. Vampire Lord of None. Cool. Kind of has the Isabella thing where he has a couple melee buffs in a weird way, but then he's not actually that good of a duelist in the first place, so who cares? He can have a dragon mount. On foot, he can have 70 melee attack, but non-armor-piercing weapon strength holds him back a bit. So the basic Vampire Lord is just a little confused. Similar to Isabella, though, he's not bad. He's fine. He's just not incredible either. He's fine. Blood Dragon Lord is very popular because of all of his amazing melee buffs and debuffs. Helm of Discord can decide an entire fight, a blob fight, but then Heart Piercing plus Sword of Anti-Heroes can make him just hit like an absolute truck on his dragon with a huge weapon strength and a bunch of melee, huge weapon strength, a bunch of armor piercing stuff. And he has Honor or Death, which gives him damage resistance and leadership as long as he's in melee. Obviously, Hunger can give him regeneration melee, and he's a basic vampire caster, so good lore to cast on, amazing dueling stats, not nearly as good of a mage, though, as some other options, because he doesn't have Arcane Conduit or any way of regenerating Winds of Magic faster. Lamian Vampire Lord, again, has a mixed lore, but for the first time, it's not death, it's shadows. So if you want Pendulum, Occam's Miners, or Enfeebling Foe, you can grab this lady up. And with Pendulum and Wind of Death, if you have some weird combination or a ton of Winds of Magic to burn, you can have 2 different wind spells going at the same time and like really mess up a box. But that's pretty niche. She, again, has some melee debuffs and some spell resistance and stuff, but again, it's a little confused because she's a weird caster hybrid. Spell resist is kind of niche, so I guess you could take her versus Nurgle if you thought Rance of Visitations was coming your way. She can have a Dragon Mount, which is, again, fine. Lamian Lord's solid. She is mostly only meta when her spells are strong, so she's spell dependent. The Blood Dragon, his melee buffs are always pretty useful, but the Lamian is just waiting for her spells to be solid. Necrarch is one of my... No, I like the Von Karstein, I guess. Anyway, Necrarch's a pretty interesting Vampire Lord. He has 3 Winds of Magic mixed in, and he does get the 2 best vampire spells. Invocation, Heck, and Raise Dead. Then he has Spirit Leech, Purple Sun, Curse of Honor here, and Pan's Penetrable Pelt. Again, kind of similar to Lamian Lord. If his spells are good, he's good. And he is meant to be a caster. Manfred is still slightly better, but he is built to get all of his spells out quickly. Arcane Conduit, Wild Heart, Life Leeching, all helping you get more Winds of Magic and quicker. And then he has Dark Protection for some tankiness. Earthing Rod for miscast chance, which you can skip that usually. 100 gold for that isn't really worth it, but this is the type of Lord. He has a Dragon Mount, but I would recommend taking him on his Hellsteed and then just cutting him down to be cheap. If you want Invocation Hex, Spirit Leech, and then let's say Curse of Honor here for some reason, you know, grab your 3 spells, get rid of these things that are all terrible, keep Life Leeching, Wild Heart, skip Arcane Conduit if you have Wild Heart, honestly, because you're going to be casting these spells quite a lot, so you should be able to keep Wild Heart up more often. And then get Dark Protection just to protect him if he ever gets caught by something. And then you have a 2,000 gold, really effective caster. But again, if these spells are particularly strong at the time or something. But I wouldn't bother making him the Zombie Dragon Lord, because if you're spending that much, you might as well get someone who's actually good at melee. The Strigoi Vampire Lord is the upgraded version of the Strigoi Ghoul King, in my opinion. Ghoul King Vushoran is a really good healing ability, especially paired up with Opal Amulet. He can be quite tanky. He brings the Power Stone, which gives you a lot of Winds of Magic quickly at the start of the game. Claws of Morcane is a pretty decent buff, but similar to his other cousin, the Strigoi Ghoul King, he loses the Zombie Summon for a Crypt Ghoul Summon, which is unique, but usually you actually want zombies more. And he does not have a Dragon Mount. He has a Terrorgeist, which is usually worse than a Dragon in almost every way. But he's a better duelist than a lot of the other lords. He's honestly a better duelist than the Blood Dragon Lord in some aspects because of his self-heal and all these other things. Plus Spirit Leech is really good at sniping. But the Blood Dragon Lord is way better at supporting a fight in general. So I think the Blood Dragon Lord just generally wins out at being a combat lord. But anyway, if the Terrorgeists ever get buffs or something, this guy is your ultimate 1v1 duelist that you have on the roster. And finally, in this bloated tons of lords option, we have the Von Karstein Lord, who is actually my favorite. Flock of Doom is overpowered right now, so maybe abuse it while you can, but if it gets nerfed in the future, I still used to take it anyway to just punish blobs. A lot of people like blobbing or air cheese versus the vampire counts, and this guy is really good at anti-cheese. He has Flock of Doom to punish any blobs you form, and then he has Storm of the Night, which is just a 3-use Tempest, which is a decent spell and slow versus air cheese. So if you suspect your opponent's going to do something cheesy, this guy can be pretty safe to grab. Similar to other things we've talked about, though, he has a hybrid of melee buffs and debuffs, but then not amazing melee capacities, and he is very expensive. So I wouldn't take him unless you really want something specific out of his kit. And he has a really weird transformation of Kadon, which summons a Vargulf. And in the current iteration, Vargulfs are tanky, cheap monsters that last a long time, but when you summon one, it has a limited duration, so that's just going to fade away, so it's probably not a good use of your Winds of Magic. So, yeah, but he is pretty neat. I do like him. That's it for the Lords. Lords are the largest part of this roster. Heroes, there are only 4. Vampire, if for some reason you didn't bring any spellcaster as your Lord, which I don't even know if that's possible, but okay, you can grab a Death or Shadows secondary caster for more focused spells. They have some mild buffs. Leadership for the undead is pretty whatever. Self-healing for Immortal Will is actually quite nice, but then Sword of Anti-Heroes is kind of anticlimactic because neither of their mounts gives them primary armor piercing, so it's pretty whatever. Taking Sword of Anti-Heroes on them when they're not even that good of duelists is a little sus. But like we talked about with Isabella, you have Immortal Will, so you're going to heal yourself up, so why do you need the Blood Chalice? So they're a little weird. Necromancer is your most common hero. He's just amazing. Corpse carts are some of the best things on the roster. We'll get to them later. You can throw him on a corpse cart on Holy Lodestone, give him the Forbidden Rod. He'll heal himself while damaging himself, and then usually don't take any extra spells. Unless, if you're playing quick play, if you're not playing in tournaments and you can take duplicate spells, a lot of people take Raise Dead on him and then your Lord, and you just have 14 zombie summons running around. That can be pretty strong. But if you're playing in tournaments, you can't do duplicate spells, so usually Necromancer is just butt naked. Maybe takes Master of the Dead, maybe takes lesser Raise Dead, maybe. But he's nice, and you really want the Forbidden Rod for those extra wins of magic. White Kings, decent little duelist guys, usually cheap and chipper. You can take Heroic Killing Blow if you want on them. A lot of people just skip it and just rely on their base weapon strength to be fine. Again, Potion of Strength is a one-time use. It's usually not worth it. And Scabscrith, it depends. It's only good versus light armor infantry. So if you're facing like Skaven, maybe Greenskins, you can take it. If not, you can just have an 850 gold, decent magic damage duelist running around, causing issues for your opponent. You usually want 2, though, for the White Kings. Finally, the Banshee. The Banshee is the most niche, but usually taken against low leadership factions. You can add the Screaming Banner and then just have this terror-causing, teeny tiny hero running around. But you have to be extremely careful with her because the Banshee does only have 4,000 HP. Relies heavily on physical resistance, which if your opponent has abundance of magic damage, she is going to die badly. Like, an access to a Spirit Leech is almost a death sentence for a Banshee because just getting Spirit Leech like 4 times kills her. But, again, Potion of Strength. This roster has the most Potions of Strength I've ever seen, and they never take them. For good reason, but Banshee can be cheap, whether you take the Scream Banner or not. Though I don't see why you wouldn't take it, because if you're taking the Banshee, you just want her terror and ghostliness, so might as well keep lowering that leadership. So, he's fine. Alright, that is Lords and Heroes. The rest of the roster looks really small. It's almost like this roster needs a DLC, please. Please. They got 1 DLC in Game 1, and somehow their roster is still one of the smallest in the game. But, moving on. Infantry. I'm just going to boot them all up here really quick. We'll go through them pretty fast, because a lot of them do similar things. Zombies. Your extremely cheap frontline. Some of the best frontline in the entire game. 12,000 HP. They are undead, so they're unbreakable. They just crumble slowly, but they'll never give in. They'll never give up. They're extremely slow, though, so you do want to send them in first and make sure your skeletons and crypt ghouls and crypt horrors don't get ahead of the zombies. Otherwise, what was the point? The Tithe. If you have extra money and you're out of unit slots is usually when you'll grab the Tithe. You don't usually grab them if you have extra unit slots left because you could just take 2 zombies. And 2 zombies is more worth it than a 200 gold zombie because 2 of them have 24,000 HP and he has just 15,000. So you do need to remember when people are like, oh, he's really good for an 100 gold cost increase. Well, you could just get another zombie and 2 zombies will beat the Tithe. But the Tithe have higher leadership, higher stats, more HP, and they have 20% physical resistance, which can be nice, again, if you have 100 gold to blow. Skeletons. Still chaff. Still terrible infantry. You don't expect to beat anything. But skeletons, 3 times as expensive as zombies. They do lose a little bit of HP, but they get some armor. They get some actual melee stats from 5 and 6 up to 18 and 22. So these guys will actually kill like Skaven slaves and peasants and stuff. They still won't do it fast, so you're still just using them to absorb damage and buy time for your Lord to carry. Do not take skeletons if you intend to break through a front line. That's really not what they do. Now, like, okay, I shouldn't say that. You can take skeletons to break through a front line if something else is doing the damage, but if you're like, I have zombies to tank and then I have skeletons to deal damage. No, neither of those units deal damage. You have 2 blockers. So, yeah, just take them if you want to resist some arrow fire or something, but they don't deal damage. Skeleton Spearmen. These are the first kind of damage dealers, and that is, you know, because of their significant anti-large. 14 can give them 28-30 for melee stats instead of 18-22. So the Skeleton Spearmen can actually do damage with the caveat of if you expect large units to be in the front line, like Skaven's Rat Ogres or Croxagors for Lizardmen. Skeleton Spearmen can be really solid. And for only 25 more gold than the Skeleton Warriors, they are honestly a steal. So if you want to deal damage, just spend the extra 25 gold. Skeleton Spearmen are amazing. Skeleton Warriors, they just struggle. But these guys are great. Skeleton Spearmen, cheap and chipper, good to go. Königstein Stalkers. A surprising unit. They have 80 armor, which I feel like I always forget about, and they have poison damage for only 175 more gold. They can be niche. Yeah, they can be niche and fine. Decent stats. Still pretty slow, still undead. Only 500 gold, though. They're not that expensive, so you can kind of use them as a bit of like a pseudo graveguard. You know how the Chaos Dwarves use the Blazing Beards of Bosrock as like a pseudo Ironsworn? The Chronic Sign Stalkers can be kind of like a cheaper pseudo graveguard. Not self-healing, obviously, but actually the graveguard aren't either. I always, the Sternsmen are so common, I feel like all graveguard have heal. But anyway, yeah, these guys are, I feel like they're secretly pretty solid. Now we're firmly in the damage dealer territory. On the current patch, Crypt Ghouls still suck worse than everything I've ever seen in my entire life, but what they're supposed to be is your aggressive, squishy infantry. They're supposed to have a high weapon strength, high melee attack. They have Vanguard and stock, so you can't usually see them coming, and a little bit of armor, but not that much. Currently, they don't have the punch behind them, but they are supposed to be your Berserker-type infantry. Feasters in the Dusk are the same type of thing, except they have Frenzy, which actually gives them a significant melee attack. Their stats are really good, but I still feel like in practice they just don't perform for some reason, and I don't know why that is. But again, on a future patch, they might get buffs and be fine. Cairn Wraiths are your other aggressive infantry, where the Crypt Ghouls are supposed to be more of your Berserker type, like churn through light infantry quickly. Your Cairn Wraiths are your elite assassins. Armor-piercing, ghost units with frostbite and magic attacks. Magic attacks good against demons or like elven characters with physical resistance. Armor piercing good versus armored stuff. So they're your elite killers, but they rely heavily on physical resistance yourself, which in Warhammer 3 has not been serving them well because a lot of the stuff they're going after has magic damage. The more elite a unit is, the more likely it is to have magic attacks and just burn your Cairn Wraiths. So, not amazing currently, but I have actually been seeing them crop up in a couple builds here and there, mostly because the Frostbite Slow can be a really good debuff to just add onto your front line. Now onto the tanky boys once again, but these are the elite tanky boys. Graveguard, all variants. The basic sword and board variant is best for when you're rushing infantry factions, like Empire or something. A couple Graveguard can be good linebackers that just hold and keep pressing forward with the rest of your troops and don't fade away and leave your Blood Knights and Lord all alone in the late game. Graveguard will hang on to the very end and stick with you, especially when supported by a corpse card. The Sternsmen are just the penultimate version of that. With their self-regeneration and higher leadership than basic Graveguard, they won't crumble nearly as fast, and they are like always the last things on the battlefield standing next to your lord. They are very loyal and strong. They do solid work. Without a significant amount of armor piercing, though, and still pretty whatever melee stats, they don't have the best time against other elite infantry, but, you know, they're there to protect you and back you up, not really win the fight. On the other side, Graveguard with great weapons, not nearly as tanky. Very easy to kill compared to their shielded compatriots. Losing 10 melee defense and silver shields is quite bad, but they pack a punch. Significant armor piercing versus armored infantry factions like Chaos Dwarves or Dwarves. I guess Grand Cathay too. So these guys will pack a punch and try and actually slap through the front line, while the Graveguard will just hold forever. So it depends on what you're wanting out of your Graveguard. Finally, the Halberds. Pretty terrible offensive stats. The Graveguard Halberds are useful if you're trying to blob. If you want to form a blob around a Mortis engine or like Helman Gorst, you just want crypt horrors and zombies and a Mortis engine and some corpse cards and stuff, Graveguard with Halberds can kill a lot of other stuff, especially if you're thinking the opponent will blob into you, like Nurgle or Lizardmen. You think they're just going to have a couple big dinosaurs surrounded by Temple Guard. You could get your own Graveguard with Halberds and try and punish those dinosaurs. So, yeah. But they're a little too slow to compare to the Graveguard with great weapons as like an offensive melee armor-piercing unit. And with only 900 gold is quite expensive for something without shields and armor. And again, the Graveguard with great weapons just are a little more aggressive about getting their damage up. Cavalry. So we have tanky cavalry, we have damage cavalry, and then we have in between. Tanky cavalry, your Black Knights. Relatively cheap blocker units. They have anti-infantry in melee, but not high enough stats to really do that much in melee versus them. The Lance variant gets significant charge bonus for a little bit more gold. Both these guys are tanky. Both these guys can take quite a while to die. Neither of them packs that much of a punch, so they're more running down units or countering skirmish elements like Wood Elf Archers or Skaven Night Runners and Gutter Runners. They're pretty solid at that. 1,000 is not cheap, though, so you do want to be a little careful with just not throwing them to their death. Varix Reavers, Almost a Blood Knight in price, almost a Blood Knight in capacity. Self-regeneration is quite nice. Decent melee defense and melee attack stats, but they are the lance variants, so they get significant charge bonus. These guys are a little underrated. If you're strapped on cash, you can downgrade one Blood Knight into these guys, and you still get a pretty elite cavalry unit. Obviously, you're losing the 300 gold somewhere. They don't hit as hard as Blood Knights, but they'll hang on. They'll do what you need heavy cavalry to do. As for the hex rates, currently they're terrible, and honestly something about them feels bugged in their models, so hopefully that gets fixed in a future patch, because it just doesn't feel like they make contact correctly with enemy units. But what this unit's supposed to do is similar to the Karen Wraith Infantry, it's just cavalry. A slow, make sure no one ever gets away from you, then magic damage and armor piercing is pretty good against a lot of elite units, and they rely heavily on physical resistance to stay alive. A low HP pool, no armor. Physical resistance is the only thing keeping these guys in the fight, and currently one Fate of Buna will take them out. One Burning Head does like half their HP. So the hex rates are currently suffering, but if magic ever isn't that strong, or if their models get fixed, maybe they'll be better. Because it is impossible to escape from these guys. 94 speed, and then they slow you by 30%. You're not leaving. The Chillgeist's higher stats version of the hex wraiths. The Chilling Aura plus Frostbite means you can slow something by 60%. And that alone does make these guys, even in their current not great state, there is one niche scenario where I'll give you they could be okay, and that is running down kiting Wood Elves. Because if you even get close to Way Watchers or Deepwood Scouts, you slow them by 30%, and then when you catch them, or catch Wild Riders or something, they get stuck, and they just can't get away from you, and they have to turn and fight, and then you can have dogs or Vargeists coming up to help. You'll need something coming up to help, and 1,700 gold is pretty expensive for a support unit, but I can see that niche being okay. I still wouldn't grab them, but like there's a niche there in this current patch. Blood Knights, these guys are more generally useful. They have been power scaled into Warhammer 3, so a lot of people are better than them. They just lack significant armor piercing. As I sip my tea, 1 second. Ah, delicious. Anyway, they've been power scaled into Warhammer 3. A lot more heavy cav are getting armor piercing, and they're just getting left behind. They aren't worth 1,700 gold right now. So either they'll get cost decrease, or they'll get the same armor piercing power shifts that a lot of other elite cavalry are getting. But ideally, Blood Knights are your anti-other cavalry with good and anti-large bonus. 22 is nothing to scoff at. Flag of the Bloodkeep gives them missile resistance when they're out in the open, and then once they're in melee, it's usually hard for other missile units to shoot them anyway. So out of melee, they have bronze shields, 110 armor, and 20% missile resistance. So Blood Knights can be really tanky to archers or handgunners when they're out and about. Frenzy gives them even more melee attack, and they cause fear. But with 22 bonus versus large, Frenzy giving you 10 more melee attack, that's like 64 melee attack versus large units, which is pretty darn good, and they have self-healing from the hunger. Blood Knights are solid. They just need a bit more damage to be currently as elite as they should be. Monsters and Beasts. Probably what the DLC, if the Vampire Counts ever get one, will give them, because this faction doesn't... This used to be the Monster and Beast faction, and now that is laughable if you look at other rosters. But, yeah, for now they have Fellbats. Incredibly cheap and annoying little sky dogs that'll chase off already routing units, but their damage is completely pitiful, and they are super squishy with only 4,000 HP and 0 armor, so you really can't throw them at anything that is already full health. They need to attack something that's significantly wounded or currently running away. Direwolves, similar, not in a great state, honestly, to the bats. A lot of undead dogs are lacking punch compared to other dogs in the game. Their significantly low leadership, 0 armor, and low HP pools mean if they get charged by anything, they will take a lot of damage and die. They are decent at chasing down routing units. Well, actually, they're good at chasing down routing units. And they're decent at killing archers that are full HP, but it depends on the archer. Like high elf archers with high stats or wood elf archers with high stats will honestly just beat up the dogs and win anyway. But basic archers like from the Empire or Bretonia, dogs will make mincemeat out of them. The Dire Pack are better. Significant bonus versus large. These guys can be really good at accompanying Blood Knights or Black Knights and taking fights on flanks. Usually good against low armor factions like Slaanesh or Wood Elves, where their cavalry won't have like 110 armor for these guys to just chomp on and break their teeth. But, you know, for only 650 gold, it can be a really good companion unit for your cavalry against those factions that I mentioned. Crypt Horrors. Your box breakers, your big boys, they accompany the front line. Get mired in zombies and just churn through with natural regeneration and then usually sitting next to a corpse card of some kind. These guys will heal cap before the game is over every time, every single time. Really good armor-piercing weapon strength, solid stuff for only 900 gold. Cryptors are a must in any rush build, at least 3 or 4. Vargeists, the big unit for the vampire counts. Now, they are incredibly squishy. 10 armor, 6,000 HP is not a lot at all. They are flying, so they're up in the sky where everyone can see them, and only 25 melee defense is also abysmal for staying alive. What all of that leads to, within a 1,000 price point, is if you play perfectly with them, they have high melee attack and very high weapon strength with significant armor piercing. And since they're flying, they can take a lot of good fights they want to. These guys are amazing, but require a ton of babysitting. But extremely high damage flyer that the vampire count's currently using to win any games ever. Devil's Schwarzhofen, just a slightly better Vargeist. They have Vanguard and Terror instead of Fear. I guess that's kind of nice for 250 more gold. You also get more leadership, more melee attack, and more melee defense. But a little expensive for such a squishy unit, and it doesn't have extra survivability. So be careful if you take them. Don't let them get caught. Vargulfs are the opposite of Vargeists. They don't hit particularly hard. You know, they hit, but not crazy for a single entity monster. Like, they won't compare to a giant or a Dread Saurian. Actually, they do less than half the damage of a giant per swing. But they make up for that with 80 speed, a small model so they can group up with another Vargeist in 2v1 most things. Self-regeneration with the hunger. And then it says regeneration. Does it also have natural regen? I don't see it, but maybe. Maybe that's just left over. I don't know. Causes terror, immune to flanking is pretty new, so things like that. The only problem with it is it has actually crazy low leadership, and I have seen Vargulf's negative 55 leadership, and then they disintegrate. They just delete themselves at like half HP if they get surrounded and spooked. But I think immune to flanking will help with that a lot, because now they don't have leadership penalties when they're surrounded. And the Terrorgeist, 2,000 gold for an anti-large duelist dragon-type character. Its Death Shriek is not a very good breath attack, but it is a breath attack that exists. At a high price point with self-regeneration, this thing can be kind of tanky, I suppose, but when you usually have a Dragon Lord that is also super expensive, you're probably spending 5,000 gold if you take this and another Dragon Lord, so that's almost half your funds spent on those. So you better have a plan for what you're doing with those two things. Usually it's just a little too expensive. The only times I can really see a Terrorgeist being useful is if you have like Heinrich Kemmler or Helman Gorst as your lord, or Vlad, and you don't have to spend that much on them, then a Terrorgeist could be okay, I guess. Oh, that tea is still delicious. Wow. Oh. In the final category, chariots, artillery, and war machines. Only one of those applies. We have 3 corpse cards. Corpse Cart regular just gives perfect vigor, plus 5 melee attack and melee defense around it. That is it. It self-regenerates. It is cheap. Corpse Cart Balefire gives the same, plus 5 melee attack and melee defense. But it also has Balefire. Gives flaming and magic attacks and flame resistance to everyone around it. In Warhammer 3, like we've said, there's a lot of power creep with magic attacks everywhere, but also there are demon factions. So versus demon factions, you might want to grab a Balefire and just give all of your units magic attacks, bypassing demonic physical resistance entirely. It can be quite nice. And the flaming attacks, now the flaming attacks debuff healing, can be really good against Lizardmen heal blobs or Nurgle double, you know, because they want to heal and they like physical resistance, and the Corpse Cart Balefire is just like, no, absolutely not. Unholy Lodestone is the most popular though. Has the same plus 5 melee attack, melee defense, but it also has a constant heal and leadership buff, which will stop you from crumbling, and obviously heal you back up, making your front line insanely tanky. So corpse carts are a must if you're taking this faction. The plus 5 melee attack, melee defense, and the perfect vigor, plus the various buffs they offer, is like the whole point of the roster. If you're skipping a corpse cart, don't even play this faction. Like, they are that crucial to how this faction is supposed to function. And again, normally you see the necromancer taking the corpse cart, that's fine. But as long as there is a corpse cart somewhere, you're doing your job. Now onto the aggressive chariots. For fast aggressive, you have the Black Coach. It has various buffs that charge up as you get kills with nearby units. If the Black Coach is around, it gets these buffs. It can get rather tanky. It can start to do some serious damage. It is pretty squishy, though. If it gets into a bad situation, it's less than 6,000 HP, only 60 armor. And before it gets some of these buffs, where it gets damage resistance from Black Nimbus and whatever, it can take a shellacking. It is a chariot. It's supposed to path through infantry a lot, get a lot of kills there. It does not want to fight cavalry. It doesn't really want to duel single entities. It doesn't want to fight monstrous infantry. It's just supposed to churn through infantry like nobody's business. Mortis engines, Claw of Nagash included. Claw of Nagash just has mildly better stats than the Chilling Aura, right? And spell resistance. Okay, so these are the same unit. This one just has a Chilling Aura and spell resistance, so I'm going to skip it. But they're the same. Mortis engines do no damage in like melee. Obviously, they don't duel. They don't do any of that. They are just a drain unit. They have Blasphemous Tome, which gives you more Winds of Magic faster. They have the Mortis engine effect that everyone refers to. The Reliquary Corruption is AoE damage. As long as it's in melee with something, it'll drain everything around it very nicely. And then it imbues magical attacks and heals everything around it as well. So it's kind of a pseudo Corpse Cart in that effect, but it usually actually pairs up with a Corpse Cart to stack healing auras, to stack buffs and debuffs, those kinds of things. So it's very nice. Mortis engines are the winner of blob fights and the destroyer of enemy boxes, but its tall model makes it very squishy to ranged fire and single entity duelists. It's not that weak to cavalry or monsters unless it's left completely alone, but as long as you have a zombie around it somewhere, it can churn through monstrous infantry and cavalry all day. So it'll be fine. Just keep zombies near it in some capacity. That is the entire roster. Let's do some theoretical builds. All right, let's do Khorne. Khorne's pretty spooky. On this patch, Khorne is probably going to take a bunch of Minotaurs. They might take the Hellforged Bellowers and try and kite you. All right, so we have Minotaurs to deal with. We have the Hellforged Bellowers kite. We have Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes. Okay. Got it. So they have limited access to Rampage. Limited. Scarbrand can do it. They also have Karanak. So what we should probably do... We don't want zombies versus Khorne. That's just going to charge their army abilities, so we'll try and reduce our zombies. But let's get 3 Halberds, a Mortis Engine, and a Necromancer. So these are going to be our ground crew. They'll stick together. I'm going to go... This thing gives me magic damage AoE, so I'm going to go with the Unholy Lodestone for healing. And then... each nearby entity death. We're not taking a lot of entities, so I don't know if I need Master of the Death. I'm going to skip it, just keep this guy super cheap. I'll take a lesser zombie summon, it's fine. There we go. So this is going to be my ground force. I'll have my Halberds defending the Mortis Engine, and they'll do okay. Also grab some Skeleton Spears. They're good against Minotaurs, they're good against Flesh Hounds and things like that. The Mortis Engine is going to have to do most of the infantry killing for me. So that'll handle infantry, Flesh Hounds, Minotaurs on the ground. Okay. What about the Hellforged Bellowers just shooting at my Graveguard? That's going to be tricky. I think we need to snipe it with spells. Let's grab Manfred. He's very strong this current patch. And like, since we know we need to kill the Hellforged Bellowers as fast as possible, we'll grab Spirit Leech, Gaze of Nagash, and Doom and Darkness. If I get its leadership low, I can just cast Doom and Darkness and kill this thing off. I will put him on a dragon. I'm going to cut the Sword of Unholy Power. I know it's really strong, but also I feel like if Manfred lands, he's going to get wrecked. So I'm going to use the Zombie Dragon for breath attacks. It is unfortunate how expensive the Zombie Dragon is. But I think that's just, it is what it is. You have the Forbidden Rod, yeah? Okay, I don't need Arcane Conduit. It's a little redundant. With Forbidden Rod giving me a burst of faster power recharge, and then the Mortis Engine giving me slow power recharge, I don't need to also get more power recharge with this, because since I don't have the Sword of Unholy Power, and this, I feel like this game's going to be pretty quick, is also what I'm thinking. So anyway, I don't want Manfred to be in melee too much. This game isn't going to go that long. I don't need Arcane Conduit. Honestly, I don't know if I need Life Leeching either, but I'll keep it for now. If we need the gold, we'll cut it. So we have Doom and Darkness to get rid of demonic units, including the Hellforged Bellowers, Spirit Leech, and Gaze of Nagash to get rid of those as well. And then I think I'll just do Invocation and Hack, just in case I need a clutch heal somewhere or something. It's always quite good. I'm already running out of Winds of Magic. Let's do a couple of Vargeists. Their armor piercing is nice, and if they can get us around on something, that's also quite nice. Rear charge Minotaurs and whatever. Do quite good there. Ugh, I'm so tempted because all my instincts are telling me, now you can just grab a bunch of zombies and widen out your build versus Khorne. I don't think I want to do that. But then again, zombies... Actually, I don't know if that's that bad. What's the point? Khorne gets a bunch of kills. They get Horn of Khorns. They get more melee stats. Whoop-de-doo. None of my guys have particularly strong melee defense anyway. The Undying Rage is whatever, and a Sword of Khorne could be potent if I blob too much. So I guess if I avoid blobbing, it could be fine. So Manfred's going to kill the Hellforged Bellowers for me. Vargeists are just good at rear charging things and helping me deal with skirmish cavalry. I don't have Fate of Buna to deal with skirmish cavalry, but Khorne has some spell resistance, so I don't know if Fate of Buna is worth it anyway. And I need these other spells for other things. So I think I need a little bit more anti-skirmish. That's tough, though, because, like, I don't have any artillery to force him into me. So if I take dogs without any support, they're going to run out towards the skirmish cav. Skirmish cav will run away, and Minotaurs will run up and peel. Yeah, that's not ideal. Let's cut one halberd. Let's cut one halberd. Maybe get a Blood Knight and the Dire Pack, just for a little bit of mobility presence. So then I can keep mobile with the Blood Knights, the Dire Pack, double Vargeist, and Manfred, and then I have this tiny little formation with the Mortis Engine, 2 halberds, and 3 spears, and the Necromancer for melee. And if Khorne overcommits to the melee, I can obviously super punish them with breath attacks from Manfred, or rear charges from the Vargeist or something. And obviously if they super blob on the Mortis Engine, they're going to get drained. So this could be an anti-Khorne build. Khorne, I think, in the current meta is pretty tough against vampire counts, though. So I think I randomly selected a tough matchup, but I think this build could do okay. It's pretty small, but most builds versus Khorne are small because you don't really want to feed them too much. All right, so that was a melee-heavy faction. For a different build, let's find someone who's going to play a little more defensive. Ooh, the Coast. Coast is kind of a fun one. Oh, no, they're just going to crab blob. Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to think of someone who actually takes a bunch of range units versus the counts. So Coast will just crab blob you. That's not really going to work. Yeah, let's do Wood Elves. Sure, why not? Wood Elves. They're either going to Durthu blob or kite you. Let's get ready for both of those. I actually do like Kemmler here. Cloak of Mist and Shadows isn't that useful in this specific matchup because Wood Elves have a bunch of magic damage, but if they take Durthu, summoning Krell on him is really annoying. So, we'll do that. I will take the Chaos Tombblade because it's quite good. Invocation Hack and Zombie Summon, and that should be good. So now we have a super cheap Lord, and we can go really wide. Really, really wide. Let's grab a front line of zombies, backed up by 2 Skeleton Spears, so we have 4 and 2. Let's go 4 and 3. Screw it, why not? We're feeling a little spicy. I will take a Necromancer, Balefire, Forbidden Rod, and nothing else because he's going to get shot by Way Watchers or something terrible. And then we'll do another Corpse Cart on Holy Lodestone so that they have to at least divide their fire. Cool. So there's my front line. Let's grab some Crypt Horrors. They're pretty weak to Wood Elf Archers, but the point of taking Heinrich Kemmler and the Necromancer is to go crazy wide so the Archers don't have a lot of great targets. But now we need to stop them from kiting us. So this is our solid front line. It'll beat most of the Wood Elf front lines that they're capable of bringing. But now we got to run these guys down. Let's get some Blood Knights. Let's get some Black Knights. Let's actually get the Varix Reavers. And then I want dogs. I know I'm going over budget. I'm going to figure out what I need. So 3 dogs, 2 Blood Knights, Varix Reavers. That's a lot of mobility and pretty solid if Heinrich Kemmler comes out and helps out. But where do I get 770 gold back? I don't know if I can afford 3 things like this. So I'll keep the Blood Knight. I'll keep the Varix Reavers. Multiple dogs are nice at running down archers. Well, if I have Blood Knights and I need to win the fights, honestly, Curse of Years might be okay at supporting Cav battles. So with my extra money, I'll grab a Curse of Years. 400 gold. Could do a Fellbat. It's just annoying for archers. Like if they have Way Watchers or something, I can send the Fellbats after them and be a nuisance. Then if they waste ammunition on it, that's good for me. Or if a Wild Rider has to peel off from the front line to go kill my Fellbat, I can maybe rear charge with Blood Knights or dogs. So that could work in my favor. Other than that, 67 gold. Was that a chevron on each zombie? Pretty close. Yeah, something like this. It's a chevron on a fellbat. Nah. It's a chevron on a dog. I think that's 25. Ah, it's -1, you pooper. Okay. This could be okay versus Wood Elves. So Durthu in the late game, you'll just want to surround him in the skeleton spears, crypt horrors, and hit him with Krell. But if they try and kite you, run them down with your Blood Knights, dogs, bats, and your crypt horrors. And if they just go with a wide archer heavy build, throw your front line at them, keep the crypt horrors in reserve until your Blood Knights hit the flanks, and then when their archers are if their archers are shooting your Blood Knights, your crypt horrors charge in. If your archers are saving themselves for your crypt horrors, then your Blood Knights should win the fight versus Wild Riders, so it's fine. The main thing is watch out for the Wild Hunters of Kurnos. Wherever the Wild Hunters of Kurnos are, throw down your Curse of Years when they get engaged. -24 melee attack for those guys, because their arm-piercing stats are really annoying for Blood Knights. Like we said in the build guide, Blood Knights are currently getting power crept because they don't have armor-piercing, so Wild Hunters of Kurnos kind of wreck their whole day. But if you Curse of Years them, they're still just Wild Riders. They will take a lot of damage and die. Alright, goodbye!
Subscribe, yes, yes.